The PBSA is committed to diversity, inclusion, and equity work. As an organization based in Tacoma, Washington, we acknowledge the Puyallup tribe and invite you to visit the official website of the Puyallup and listen to their land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. The Puyallup people have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so today. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is one small step towards true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the Indigenous people of this land and beyond.
Thank you so much, Laurel. And hi, Amanda. We missed you last month, but so glad that you're back. And welcome everyone to our November Zoom lunchtime conversation. I don't know how everybody else feels, but I can't believe we're 1 week away from Thanksgiving. As many of you know, I retired in June, and I feel like I've been busier than ever, but only with the great things, the book arts. So I'm so happy that you're all here today. And we're so pleased to welcome Gabby Cooksey as our lunchtime conversation speaker.
Absolutely. And I feel the same way. It's good to be back, and fall just flew by. So this is a great conclusion to our 2023 Zoom lunchtime conversations with Gabby. More to come in the future, of course. And I know for many of you, Gabby really needs no introduction, as she's based in Tacoma and an active member of the book arts community. But in preparing for this presentation, I revisited Gabby's website, Bound for Cooksey, which sort of has a double entendre there. And I love the statement that she shares. So I'm going to quote her. So this is her voice, not my voice, but I'm quoting. Right out of high school in 2010, I went to college at Columbus College of Art and Design, and I did very well there, and it was a great school, but I knew college wasn't right for me. I wanted to be doing what I wanted right then and there, not 4 years down the line. So I spent most of my time at the Columbus Metropolitan Library and happened upon a book about books. It had gilding, leather, beautiful designs, and I said, this is exactly what I want to do. So in 2011, I went to American Academy of Bookbinding in Telluride, Colorado. My first bookbinding teacher was Don Glaister, and then I attended the North Bennett Street School in Boston, Massachusetts from 2012 to 2014 and graduated from their bookbinding program. That's a little bio there.
So Gabby, we are all so delighted that you found your calling to do what you wanted when you wanted, and so happy that you moved to Vashon Island to work with Don and Suzanne Moore as a studio assistant, worked with Jessica Spring, as well as sharing your expertise with students and in workshops. I know at the University of Puget Sound, you offered many workshops to our students, and they learned so much from you. And most recently, of course, your work has been internationally recognized by the Designer Book Guild in Great Britain, and on a national level, the prestigious Library of Congress. We look forward to hearing about your most recent work. But before we turn over to you, I want to read another quote in your voice from your work blog. So Gabby states, when asked why I do what I do, it is really because I love it. There is nothing quite like holding a physical book, especially when the person who made it has spent so much time lovingly putting it together. Craft is important to show where I have come from, past binders, and the design is important because that's where I'm headed, myself as an artist. Gabby, thank you for joining us today. The screen is yours.
Thank you for that introduction. I feel like I should be used to this. This has been my year of presentations, but every time, like, I can already see the dewy complexion and the redness. So here we are. Thank you all for being here. This time that I prepared for you is between February 2022, which was Codex time, and to a couple months ago. And the reason I was originally doing this conversation is because I was going to give my Library of Congress talk that I gave in January of 2023. And it's almost been a year, which is kind of crazy. You're right, time has flown by. And it just keeps going. Codex, the next Codex is happening again in San Francisco in February of 2024. So that's what I'm preparing for, and it just, time keeps going. So I got to have a half booth at Codex 2 years ago, and it was my first time showing, and I learned quite a bit. It's a very big event for people who love books, people who buy my work attend there, so I can meet the people who have bought my work, and it's a lovely time. It's 4 days and it's pretty exhausting. It's just having to be on all the time, and I didn't sell anything, but something came out of it. Of the Library of Congress talk came out of it, because I was going to have dinner with my book dealer Ian Kahn. And at that dinner, the Library of Congress people were there, Mark Dimunation and Stephanie Stillo. And I was my charming self, and I must have been remembered, because a couple months after that, I was contacted to give a presentation about bookbinding to the Library of Congress. And it was a really big deal. It was a very scary thing to say yes to, but I'll show you more pictures later. I'm going to be showing a handful of books and boxes that I've done in between this time too. And one of those boxes I got to make, or artist books I got to make, was Portmandemic, a artist book by Jessica Spring. I got to make the lovely box, the luggage, the container for this book. And it houses her 2 prints and her writing. And she's known to give me interesting ways or interesting ideas of how to put a box together. She'll throw the idea out, and then I will try to make the box. So this was meant to be a luggage piece where you unpack everything. So those 2 panels in the back actually sit on top of her prints. You pop those panels out, and then you open these gigantic, I think it's like 15 by 50 inches long broadside, and you pack that back in. But then there's a little secret thing where if you lift the trays out, so at the bottom where the prints rest in, those trays pop out. They're held together with magnets. I don't have a picture, unfortunately, but it shows the colophon and the portmanteaus that Jessica used in her broadside. So it's just it's a box that keeps on giving, and it was really fun to puzzle together. This was my Gulliver's Travels book. I was given this text block by Ian Kahn, and it's actually a 2-parter. It's from, I'm going to say this wrong, Brobdingnag, The Story of the Giants in Gulliver's Travels, and then also from Lilliput, so the miniature land. So the book, this mouse book, is actually really, really big, and then I'm going to show a picture soon of the miniature binding. So this was a behemoth to make. It ended up being 23 pounds. It's a really heavy book, and I added more weight to it because I made this decoration out of brass, out of 2 layers of brass. And you can see the 2 layers more distinct here, of a base layer with all the ornaments. And then I love the illustrative style. I love black line work drawings. So I really wanted my brass to mimic line work. So that's why I did the 2 layers, so you can really see the mice. This is the miniature binding of Lilliput. And it's the scene, the iconic scene of Gulliver being strung up on the beach, and these are his hands on the beach getting tied up. And the last one was about him being miniature, Gulliver being miniature, and having to fight off the mice. One of them runs away, and the other one he kills with a tiny little sword that he found. I wanted to include this picture of me photographing this book and how massive it was. It takes up my whole desk. And I had to create a special photography area for this, like make this the white sheet come down, because I didn't have the right setup for photographing this gigantic book. And I also got to puzzle together this clamshell box with the large book beneath it, and the miniature is set inside that little rectangle, and it actually goes on top. So it cushions everything together once the clamshell box is closed. Later on, a couple months after Codex in San Francisco, I got to go to Oxford in England because I had received an award from the Designer Bookbinders International Show. I won a silver prize. There's like 25 of us that won, and you got this cute little plaque, but you also got to tour the Wormsley Library, which is owned by, I don't know, Getty. You know the name Getty. So this is an amazing library we got to tour. This was the group of people there. I got to represent the US because Mark Esser and Graham Patton also won, so I got to take their awards with me back home. And it was really nice to be there and meet all the bookbinders over there because I don't know them well. And yeah, it's pretty dreamy to be there. This is my picture with my book. I'll show a better picture of the book, but I was just very excited to be there. This was the book that won the prize. It's from, I did a design binding of my artist book called Blight. Blight is a poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I matched his poem with photographs I took of Point Defiance here in Tacoma. And this image is from an image inside the book. So it's these root balls turned on its side and mirrored. So it looks like this creepy spider coming out. And it's actually 3 layers of brass and also a very heavy book to create this design. The binding is a piano binding that I learned from Ben Elbel. He makes these wonderful instruction manuals that are really well done. They have beautiful photographs, easy to read writing, and that's how I did this structure. But the brass was a feat of itself because I went to Idaho for a week, I believe, to learn how to do flush rivets. Flush rivets are whenever you rivet a piece of brass down, and usually there's a cap above the brass, but I really wanted there to be no cap, so it's a technique of filing things down, sanding it so you can't see how the brass is fused to the cover. And there are, I believe, 88, 87 flush rivets on this book. There's a lot holding this thing on this together, so it's a fun fact of it. There's also embossing. I took board out of the cover, so that's the shadowy roots that you see on the edges. This is the original image that I used for the cover. You can tell it's from Moody Pacific Northwest. And this is a better image so you can see the layers of brass and how the piano binding is structured. So there's 2 brass rods holding the whole cover down. And I chose this binding because I could work the brass off of the book without having to ruin the book. So I can get everything dusty and dirty, file everything, and do it all off the book. And then at the last minute, you adhere the text block and the cover together. And this was the Wormsley Library. It was housed in this, I don't know how many acres, but it was this huge compound, and this was the library in the shape of a castle. And in front there, what's fenced in are terrier dogs just running it around, being adorable, just living the posh life. This was inside the Wormsley Library. He had set out a lot of books. I only included the one on the right. It's a beaded book with beautiful clasps. I love clasps, so most of my pictures were of how they did it way back when and the designs of the clasps. But it was amazing. And he also has a collection of bookbinders books. So like people writing about bookbinders. And usually I've never seen old stuff from like 1850 about bookbinders. So it was really, really neat to see. This was the culmination of a lot of prep work to get ready for my Library of Congress talk. It was a really big deal to me. I was supposed to give a 15-minute talk of how bookbinders put materials on their books, but also include books from the Aramont collection. This was the Aramont collection was the reasoning for all of us getting together here. The Library of Congress had just acquired this collection of design bindings and artist books, a beautiful collection. So I was to talk about that and talk about my own work and how bookbinders do what they do, all in 15 minutes. The picture on the left, maybe you can see, I made this little book so I knew how to read everything off of. I have the slide next to it and everything. So that's what I'm looking at in that picture. And I never looked up. And my sweet boyfriend was waiting with the camera to take a picture if I ever looked up, and I never did. So here we are. It's a good picture. Afterwards, they had a lot of the Aramont collection out, along with newly acquired things. And my book, Pangolin Pandemic, was alongside Rose Adler and Teeny Mira. And it was just very surreal to see my book along with these names. And it was very, very cool. During the presentation, I handed people a plaquette I made. So in the presentation, there's a video that happens of me making this plaquette. And I really wanted people to feel this, because usually my books you have to request them or someone else has to handle them for you. And I really wanted people to feel how I put on a gator claw or feel the brass being flushed through the leather. I just wanted them to touch it because I'm a very tactile learner and I wanted people to have that option. So that's that going around. And now this will be the very formal presentation of the Library of Congress talk. So I'm gonna get my notebook. First of all, I'd like to thank Stephanie and Emily for inviting me to be here today. It's a lovely thing to be asked to talk about what you love, let alone from the Library of Congress. It was a dream of mine to get a book into this library, and in 2016, it became true. I was jumping up and down in my studio. I called my mentors and my mom and danced around and got ice cream to celebrate. That's exactly how it felt to get asked to do this talk, so thank you. I had my friend Photoshop this for me in front of the Library of Congress. My name is Gabby Cooksey, and I'm a full-time bookbinder and book artist in Tacoma, Washington. I tend to use unusual materials on my bindings, so that's what I'm bringing you today, a look behind the scenes of my studio. The Aramont collection has a plethora of techniques used on the covers, so I wanted to combine my work and a few from the Aramont to show you how we put things on covers, because that can be a little unknown. I attended traditional schools for bookbinding at the American Academy of Bookbinding and graduated from North Bend Street School in 2014. I had a 6-year studio assistant job with Don Glaster and Suzanne Moore, prominent bookbinder and book artist couple that really shone the light on materials I can use on books and gain confidence with my own creativity. I want to note that I'll be talking about design bindings and artist books. So that you understand this jargon, a design binding is typically an already made book, say Alice in Wonderland, and the binder rebinds the book with leather and showing off their skills on the cover. An artist book is a book where the artist and or bookbinder creates the whole thing, writes it, illustrates it, prints it, and binds it. To begin, I wanted to share with you the first binding I felt the spark of excitement of what I could do. In 2011, while at the American Academy of Bookbinding, I bound the book Fantasy and Nonsense using shark's teeth. The hunt for materials in the mountains of Colorado, daydreaming about how it would look and figuring out how to puzzle everything together really hooked me. Also, the positive response was infectious. Another binding where I thought I found my groove was for my artist book, The Book of Penumbra. I did a design binding in 2015 using 7 black pearls that I dremeled out to look like skulls and wired them to the cover. What a fun thing to figure out, and I still look back fondly on this book. The book is about death gods from around the world, so I think I appeased them by making this cool book for them. This is a close-up of the dremeled out skulls. So you see, I like sticking things on books, and I want to show you how I do that. Here is a drawer full of bits and bobs that I have in my studio. There's a lot going on here, and I love that. I love that I have drawers labeled butterfly wings, glass goat eyes, and teeth. The Aramon collection is a little more tame than this, but the craftsmanship is divine and uses some of these techniques in a more subtle way. I'm usually asked, why am I drawn to these unusual materials? Well, it could be that I like puzzling ways on how to put them on a cover, or I like the shock effect, but truly, I love nature. I love morbid things, and I love putting things front and center to make you look at it and touch it. Because after all, I hope my bindings make you want to open the book. Another question one might have is, where do I source some of these materials? Sometimes I buy them from a reputable site, like the Emerald Jewel Beetle Wings from Thailand that you'll see later, but I mainly seek them out. When I go on travels, I'll go to a curiosity shop or walk along the beach and find a cool rock. Sometimes I get bones left on my porch by friends because they know I'll love it. One time while working in Don and Suzanne's studio, Don had been cleaning out under the porch and found a raccoon arm. He knew I would enjoy it, so he left it on my bench for me the next day, and it's still prominently displayed in my own studio. For this talk, I made a plaquette or a mock-up cover to display the 6 skills that I'll be showing you through the video. Adding and removing board, inlays, onlays, brass, tattooing, and 3D objects. Let's start. The first technique I'd like to show you is adding and removing board, a simple and quick way to add dimension to the cover. Here I am removing board, first cutting out the shape, making sure it's smooth. You'll see every little bump through the leather if you don't take the time to smooth things out. I then paste up the leather and cover the board with it, really pressing down with my palms to make sure I can see a hint of the design. The palms are such a good tool. I do the turn-ins and corners on the plaquette. I then go back with a Teflon bone folder and gently go over the line work again. Wet leather is notoriously fragile, and you can easily slip and mar the leather, so just go slow and all will be well. This is an example of a design binding for my artist book, Blight, using this technique. I wanted to create a larger root ball than what the brass was doing, so I took away layers of board on the outside edge. I also took away board where the brass sits, so it can fit snugly into the cover and not be protruding too far out. This is a close-up of the cover where you can see the 3 layers of brass and how thick the boards are on the covers. The brass was attached using flush rivets. A book from the Aramon collection by Don Glaister, who I mentioned earlier, Did a design binding on a poetry book by Yeats. Dawn likes to create illusions of depth using this technique. You can really see it in the V in the bottom right corner, creating the lapels of the jacket. There are also onlays on the cover, which I'll be talking about next, so I'll point them out now. They are the aluminum hanger, the white arc in the middle, the button on the spine, and the serrated scissors on the top edge. So onto onlays and tattoos. The tattooed leather will be the base of my onlay. An onlay is a piece of leather or paper adhered directly to the cover. I learned how to tattoo in the spring of 2021 through YouTube videos and asking my own tattoo artist for tips. I fell in love with the illustrative effect right away. Once I'm done tattooing and all is dry, I can cut out my shape, which is the circle. I go very slowly, making sure to cut to the board and gently lift up. I then prep the cover on the plaquette by scraping and roughing up the leather for better adherence. I paste up the onlay 3 to 4 times. I'm only showing once here, but you really want to make sure the paste is saturated through and then stick it down. Make sure none of the paste is coming out of the edges by using your fingernail or bone folder along the edge. Let dry before doing anything else. An example of tattooing is for the book Dark Archives by Megan Rosenblum. I did this in 2021 for an exhibition for Ian Kahn. I have always wanted to tattoo, so here was my chance on a book about human skin bindings. It took about 2 months of experimentation to get the tattooing how I wanted it. I did this with the tattoo machine, and it's very similar to tattooing on human skin. I myself am too nervous to tattoo on someone, let alone myself, but the process is the same, except the tattoo shop is more sterile. Here you can see some of the tattoo process. I use a stencil, much like a normal tattoo, to follow what I'm doing. You can see the ink in the ointment, which helps the tattoo machine glide over the surface, and it really darkens the leather. I'll wipe most of the ink off later, but there will remain a shadow seeped into the leather. I did an onlay for my artist book, Pangolin Pandemic. The vellum pangolin tail is tacked on straight to the cover. The inside pages of Pangolin Pandemic are made up of hundreds of onlays to form the scales of the pangolins. These scales are either paper, wallpaper, or cloth onlays. This design binding of Animal Farm by me uses vellum onlays for the skin, black leather goat skin onlays for the shadows, and strawberry paper onlays for the nose to make up the smoking pig head. The book is made up of beautiful illustrations by Jonathan Hammer, and that's where I got this inspiration from. This is a close-up of the pig's head to really see the strawberry paper nose. This binding by Riviere from the Aramont collection is a beautiful example of onlays. The 2 snakes outlining the cover is made up of yellow and blue and red scales, and the brown leather eye shape in the center is also an onlay. Brass and inlays. An inlay is a good way to keep everything flush with the cover of the book. So when you lay the book flat, nothing catches on the surface. In this video, I'm working with brass and using it as an inlay. I first cut the brass out using a jeweler's saw, which is a very slow process. The blades on the saw are very thin and delicate. I could use a laser cutter to do all my brass work, but I think it loses the humanity of it. I like the time it takes, the skill involved, and knowing I did it all. I then file and sand the brass to what I want. I place the piece on the leather and cut exactly along the edge. Luckily, the brass has a hard edge to cut against. Make sure you cut to the board and gently remove the leather, making sure you're not lifting up the outer leather. Double check to see if it fits, and I then epoxy the brass to the board. I love using brass, as you can see. The most recent binding I did at the end of 2022 was of Gulliver's Travels. It's a 2-volume book, but I'm showing only one here because it's a behemoth and I'm quite proud. At 18.5 inches tall and weighs in at 24 pounds with the clamshell box, it was a toughie to cover. This was all cut out with a jeweler's saw. I learned a lot about cutting big pieces of brass, such as how to make the cuts on the inside of the brass when my saw's jaw wasn't big enough. There was a lot of dremeling and filing involved. Here's a close-up of the 2 layers of brass. I wanted to show depth and illustrative lines of the rats. This was all adhered down with epoxy. There's a lot of examples of inlays in the Aramont. This lovely Leroux binding with a pink boa snake is an inlay. Another Leroux binding using a box calf inlays, which is a chrome tanned calf skin leather. In this Martin book using wood veneer puzzled together as an inlay. Don Glaister uses a combination of inlays and onlays and cutouts in his artist book, The Voyager. There's aluminum, plastic, airbrush, acrylic, and more, which really adds to the dynamic nature of the book's content. Now on to flat 3D objects. I like to use brass wire a lot in my work. It's easy to use, cheaper, and sandable. This cut rock is being mounted in place using 4 wires. I drill the holes in the cover and cut the wire oversized to make sure there's enough to crimp over onto the back. I make right angle crimps on the wire and mount the rock in between them. Then we have to deal with the back cover where all the wires are poking out. I pull the wires taut, fixing the front, and then cut channels out of the board so whenever I crimp over the wire, they have a place to go. I fill the channels with epoxy, checking on it every couple hours to make sure the wire is staying down. But once dry, I can sand everything down flat. You want it flat on the back so there's no unsightly bumps when you line the back. This miniature design binding, bound by me, called the Little Book of Fae, uses wide gold wire to create arcs around the abalone shell. The shell is also held on with the gold wire and framed with chicken feet leather onlays. A different angle of the miniature book to really see the abalone shell protruding from the cover. I created a special clamshell box to house the book so nothing gets damaged. From the Aramont collection, we have this clamshell box made by an unknown binder. I'm not 100% sure how they tacked the book cloth pants on, but I'm guessing they either are sewn onto the box spine or just glued. Finally, we end with an irregular 3D shape. I am using a gator claw I picked up in Portland, Oregon during one of my travels. I could have wired this down, but I chose to rivet it with 2 pins. I first drill holes into the claw, insert pins in, and poke little holes into the cover where I want it to go. I'll Dremel the cover and then insert the pins through everything. Next, I use clippers to cut close to the board, riveting the pin down, creating another pin head on the inside cover, and it's done. I used this technique on my design binding for my artist book, Chronicles of a Coleopterist Strikingly Curious Swarm. I purchased 100 emerald jewel beetle wings online from Thailand and used a pin similar to the one in the video to mount them. The only difference is that I crimped them on the inside cover, much like the wire, since they were very thin pins. This is a close-up of the beetle wings and pins. Some are pinned really well to the cover, while others have some slack in the pin so the wings flutter a bit. Some of these techniques were taught to me traditionally at school, but a lot of it was experimentation. They don't teach you how to wire parakeet wings on a book at school. I have a box of plaquettes where I test out my ideas to see if they work. Some failed, like trying to hinge a piece of brass over a spine, or tattooing on very grainy or bumpy leather, but you never know until you try. The plaquettes are also a nice thing to look back onto to see what has worked and what has not. So there you have it, my procession of lovely and unusual bindings and a sprinkling from the Aramont. I hope what you gained was some insight on the skills used in bindings so you can point them out for yourself in the exhibition. But beware, some binders are tricky and like to really hide how they do it to keep you guessing. And I love that. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your time. So that was the very formal presentation for Library of Congress. I was so relieved whenever it was done. Right after I got back home from DC, I began working on a lot of tattooed bindings because I was preparing to give a presentation for the Guild of Bookworkers Standards of Excellence. I was one of the 4 speakers. So I really wanted to know what I was talking about whenever I tattoo on leather. So I did these design bindings. Ian Kahn sent me the text block. The text block is called The Victim of Magical Delusion. It was a 2-volume set where I had to repair a lot of the paper. And then I believe I sewed it on stubs and then created this tattooed leather binding. The rectangles are all brass inlays. So they're all flush to the leather cover and they feel very nice. I just learned that it sold at the Boston Antiquarian Book Fair, so that's very exciting. In March of this year, I got asked to be on a panel with Dan Kelm, and Ian was moderating it. It was a panel about collaboration, and it was my first time meeting Dan, and now he is a lifelong friend. He's done so much with his life and his career, and it was really nice to get to know him on stage. And he was also very kind. My big fear is blanking, so I just blank out and I don't know what I'm talking about, and that happened on stage. And sweet Dan helped me out of it and didn't make me feel bad about it happening. So I'm forever grateful to him. Oh, and this is Ian Kahn, my book dealer. He lives in Portland, Maine. He's a wonderful, interesting man. And yes, his shirt does say read books, punch Nazis. An ongoing project that Jessica Spring and I are doing is for her new artist book called One-Liners. I am binding it out of a 2-moosh style binding, another Ben Elbel instruction book that I got to create for this. It's a wonderful little binding that opens flat and looks very simple. I was there from the beginning when Jessica was setting all this type. She set one line every day like a diary with all of her type collection. And it's a wonderful book. So if you can ever see it, I know it's out in the world now, so you have a better chance of actually feeling it. Yeah, that's a really cool book. And it's still ongoing. It's an edition of 150. And I think we've bound 35 maybe. It's a good one. Clamshell box that I made, a tattooed clamshell box that I made for the book 13 Tattoos by Thorsten Dennerlein. This was actually a really long landscape book. So it was pretty hard to source the leather that would fit this, but we found it and it worked. This was my first time trying color, like tattooed color. And I think it worked out really nicely. And just trying new things, new tattoo machines, just trying to prepare for my September talk. This book is The Book of Werewolves by Sabine Baringgold. It's an 1865 first edition of the book. I had to do some conservation work on it to repair some paper and rebind it. I think the next image, yeah, I bound it on stubs so the book can actually open flat. The text went pretty close to the gutter, so I wanted people to be able to read it again. The whole thing is tattooed. It was my first like really big tattooed project of blacking out, lots of ink going into the leather, and I'm really happy with how this book turned out. This was the month-long event leading up to the Guild of Bookworkers presentation. It's a 2.5-hour talk, so the first half was all slideshow, and then the second half was all presenting. And I'm very glad I did it. Something terrible went wrong during the presentation. We powered through it, and it was all okay. I met a lot of people there that was attending standards for the first time because they wanted to learn how to tattoo on leather. So I learned a lot from them. Some tattoo artists attended it, so they can tell me materials to try or use, and it was really cool, and I'm glad I did it. This was the after hug after the 3 hours of talking. This was the relieved hug. With my boyfriend, Josh. And finally, what I'm working on is a book about the history of tarot cards. I'm making my own deck and currently in the process of rewrites and hopefully sending it on to a couple people to proofread for me and fact check. And this is all preparing for Codex in 3 months, 2 months. So it feels like a big thing to be able to get done. And I believe that's all I have. I might have one more picture. Oh, I went to Banff, Canada for a week, hiking around the area at all the national parks, and I took my dog, and it was a wonderful time. We went in October of this year, so still fresh in my mind. But that is it.
That's wonderful. It makes me want to go back to Lake Louise. That's great.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. Gabby, we have a few questions for you that popped in while you were talking. One is from Dorothy, and she is curious if you only made one copy of the Gulliver's Travels book, or if you had a whole edition, a series.
No, that was definitely one copy. It took a long time to make.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. Another question that popped up was about oh, it's moving on me. Let's see. Let me get back to that one in a second, but I had a question I wanted to ask you. As I'm looking at these, I can't help but reflect on kind of the ideas of memento mori, which is sort of that meditation on death in art. And so frequently you're working with things that used to be living but are now no longer living, or bits and pieces of those things. And I would love to hear more of you. Don't worry about blinking out, we got you. But like more just thoughts on those types of things, and how you think about things that have been alive that are now dead, and how you work them into your works, and sort of what do you meditate on when you're doing that?
Well, that's actually a pretty heavy question, but I'm okay with answering it because I have had a lot of death in my life and I'm very aware of it. I love reading anything about death and different perspectives of how we die. So anytime I can bring that into my work, I will. I love the idea of reusing bones, reusing teeth, and making it into art, cherishing it. Like you've seen, I have an even bigger collection of bones and just feathers, just anything. People just give me random stuff and I love it. And just the idea of being able to go through it and have ideas come later on for a book, or just, I guess it's hoarding a little bit of all these animal parts, but I know I will use them, and I will use them well too. Yeah. Sorry, I have sunlight like right now.
No, it's pursuing you. It's quite all right. Also, there's a question about the author of the binding instructions you mentioned, sort of near the end of your presentation. You talked about when you were talking about the tattoo work. So you talked about some like a manual of binding instructions or something like that, and someone was curious about that work.
I'm putting it in the chat.
Okay, awesome.
It's a man named Ben Elbel. He does the bookbinding out of the box instruction manuals, and I think he has about 8 or 10 different binding styles, and each one has a book, and it's all well done. You can buy a kit that goes along with the book, but I highly recommend them too. And he's really good at answering questions if something doesn't make sense, but it usually makes sense. So
nice. That's awesome. And here's sort of a penultimate question, and then I know Jane has some things she wants to say, but you had mentioned that the Library of Congress had this very limited duration, 15-minute presentation time, and you conveyed so much, and those videos were truly amazing. How long did it take you to prepare that excellent, truly excellent talk?
A long time. I had a lovely group of people that I asked to see the presentation. I had my boyfriend see it at least 5 times. This was really important to me, so I wanted it to be done well. And I wanted to show all the different styles of learning, of orally, through video, and then tactile too. So that it was a lot to come together, because it started off as one thing and then ended at something totally different too. So I like to plan so far ahead so that can happen as well.
That's great. Well, thanks for peeling back the layers of mystery of making. That was really, I love the videos. So thank you. Jane?
Gabby, we could spend all afternoon with you. I just want to thank you so, so much. And I do want to say, on a personal level, your enthusiasm and natural charisma make you a perfect speaker. Never doubt that. You captivated the audience. There's so many positive remarks. And so I have one quick question. We really can leave bones at your doorstep?
Yes, please. I love it.
And I just picked up and wrote this down because this just really, to me, reflects so strongly on your artistic expression and your work. When you said your bindings, you want your bindings to want us to open the books. And I think that says it all. Your work is really amazing. And we are so thankful that you are in Tacoma and also sharing your expertise with everyone. So virtual round of applause from everyone. So
Thank you.
great news. And I want to thank everyone for joining our Zoom conversations. Amanda and I are already cooking up a great lineup for 2024. And we also want to extend a thank you to Puget Sound book artists for supporting this series, and to our wonderful host, Laurel Moorhead. Thank you. Don't want to say goodbye, but we're going to stick to our time. So I'm wishing all of you a great Thanksgiving, and thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.